Hey guys! Today we'll be recapping a manhwa called The Grand Duke's Beloved Granddaughter. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe so we can bring you even more manhwa recap content. Thanks! Our story begins at the estate of Grand Duke Criton, where a young but capable private mercenary by the name of Mirabel is introducing herself to the man of the manor. He's already heard about her talents. She has a reputation for refusing to fail. That's why he hired her. Though it's not her usual type of mission, it's very important for the Duke to have the best possible person on the job. He hands her a picture of a young girl, tasking her with tracking down his daughter, Cornelia. Wait, am I seeing things? Is it just me, or does that girl look exactly like Mirabel? How is he not seeing the resemblance? The mercenary, too, seems suspicious. She hasn't heard the name Cornelia in many, many years, but it's still familiar to her. It would be, since it's her mother's name. Well, that explains the resemblance. You see, Cornelia Criton ran away from her home, choosing love over her family's honor. Although she wrote many times to beg her father for forgiveness, they never once responded. Not even after she succumbed to an illness that eventually took her life. It seems the Grand Duke is unaware of her passing, or the daughter she left behind. Otherwise, he wouldn't be asking his granddaughter to search for her. Unable to contain her anger, Mirabel asks the Grand Duke why he didn't look for her earlier, why he ignored every letter she sent. Oop, so much for hiding her identity. The Duke claims he never received a single letter, but Mirabel finds that hard to believe. She breaks it to him without any softness. Cornelia has been dead for years, and worst of all, she died hating her father who ignored her every request to be forgiven. Yikes, he won't be recovering from that one anytime soon. The old man starts to tremble, but before he can ask who Mirabel really is, they are interrupted. The Grand Duke's brother, Daniel, suddenly appears and formally introduces the mercenary as his granddaughter. He reveals himself to be her great-uncle, the true villain of this story. It turns out he was the one intercepting Cornelia's letters because he wanted to make sure his brother never took her back in. How cruel is that? He only told them all of this because he's planning to kill them both. Right now. Mirabel bravely draws her dagger and stands her ground, even when her grandfather begs her to run and save herself. She only asks if he truly loved her mother. Of course, he did, and promises he never held any resentment for Cornelia. That's all she needed to know. Mirabel shows Daniel's thugs what she's made of, but ultimately, she's unable to save herself. One of them lands a sword in her side, and she drops to the ground, realizing her life is over. But she never got to avenge her mother or make peace with her grandfather. It can't end like this. Just as the light is fading, she hears a familiar voice calling her name, and she opens her eyes to find her mother by her bedside. She's gone back in time to the days of her early childhood, just after her 9th birthday. While her mother watches her closely, Mirabel tries to piece together what must have happened. She definitely died, so how has she ended up as a 9-year-old again? Someone must have heard her pleas and given her another chance to set things right. If that's the case, then the clock is ticking. Her first task is finding a way to cure her mother. After that comes revenge. Now that she knows the real villain was Daniel all along, she might even be able to patch up the relationship between her mother and grandfather. But to do any of that, she needs to find a way to meet with the Grand Duke Criton. She starts by asking her mother about him, but Cornelia is convinced the entire family hates her and refuses to return. So that only leaves one option. Mirabel must go alone. But that's no easy feat, especially for a 9-year-old. She makes her way on board a merchant's carriage and almost gets away unnoticed. That is, until she realizes there's someone in there with her. A boy with silver hair and blue eyes is hiding right beside her. It looks like they're in the same position. The boy stutters that his name is Jeffrey Coleman, a name Maribel recognizes from her past life. Jeffrey Coleman will one day become the most famous mercenary on the continent, and even established his own guild, who were powerful enough to rival the Order of Ryan, a band of Imperial Knights. For his power and prowess, Jeffrey was more commonly known as the Mercenary King, and was known for being both trustworthy and merciful. He tried to recruit Mirabel several times back then, so she can't help but laugh when she looks at the nervous little boy he is now. She introduces herself as Mirabel Hale, a name her mother and father gave her. Jeffrey compliments her on it and asks how she ended up on this carriage. She tells him, and in turn he admits that he's being chased by the guard. Actually, he's wanted for murder. What? This little boy? No way! How could a sweet thing like him ever kill someone? Jeffrey tells the story of his time at the Sharon estate, where a man named Guyman lent money to his parents. When they failed to pay it back, he beat them to death, so Jeffrey did the only thing a child could do in that situation, and told the guards. But they did nothing. They just blamed his parents for borrowing money in the first place. Guyman soon found out that Jeffrey reported him and decided to send him down the same road as his mother and father. So the poor kid had no choice. Somehow, he managed to overpower a fully grown man and got his revenge. Despite the incredible danger he himself is in, Jeffrey seems far more concerned with Mirabel and how worried her mother will be when she wakes up tomorrow to find her daughter missing. Aww, what a thoughtful young murderer! Of course, Mirabel has no intention of turning around, and she thinks it's cute that he was worried. She gives him a little pat on the head, and Jeffrey turns bright red, demanding she stops at once. His face only gets redder when his stomach growls, and he turns away in embarrassment. Mirabel brought a few bits and pieces for the journey, so she hands him a potato and tells him to eat up. It's a long way to the capital, after all. To her surprise, Jeffrey is so grateful that he starts to cry. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I'm already obsessed with this kid. He even promises to pay her back, even though it's just a potato. It turns out there's a reason borrowing and being given food makes him so emotional. The reason his parents had to borrow money in the first place was because he was hungry. He never wants to be in debt for food again, so he offers her his hand and doubles down on his promise to return the favor. Well, there are worse people to have in your debt than the future mercenary king. 3 days later, the kids arrive in the capital and immediately break away from the caravan. They part ways, wishing the best for each other and hoping to meet again someday. As he's leaving, Jeffrey once again promises to pay her back for that potato. Okay, buddy, we get it. Now Mirabel is back on her own and more determined than ever to finish her mission. She arrives at the gates of the Criton family estate and requests an audience with the Grand Duke. You probably won't be surprised to hear that the guard refuses to let her in. I mean, for all he knows, she's just some kid off the street. Why would he accept her? Fortunately, the Grand Duke himself appears at that very moment, having just returned from an outing. He doesn't even look at Mirabel and starts heading inside without another word. But she stops him in his tracks by screaming out her mother's name. The Grand Duke is furious at first, thinking she's trying to mess him around. Mirabel explains that she's Cornelia Criton's missing daughter and tells him to come and meet her himself if he doesn't believe it. She also admits that her mother is very sick and begins to cry, begging him to help. To her surprise, the Grand Duke changes his tune at once and agrees to come and visit right away. In just a few moments, his schedule is cleared and he orders a carriage to be prepared. They head inside for some food while they wait, but Mirabel seems hesitant to eat. The Grand Duke kindly tells her that her mother would want her to stay healthy and eat up. Clearly, he can tell she's feeling guilty about indulging in a fancy meal without her. Although he's being gentle, Mirabel knows he's still suspicious. In the last 10 years, he must have been visited by countless people claiming to have information about his daughter. After all, it's a surprise he even said yes to make the journey. After eating together, Mirabel and the Grand Duke hop in a carriage and make their way to the village at once. Maybe it's because of her past life, but Mirabel is already starting to like her grandfather. He's a much kinder person than she realized, and has clearly been through a lot of pain for his daughter's sake. Even though he doesn't believe Cornelia is really her mother, he's still treating her like any grandfather would. That night, when they stop to rest, the Grand Duke pretty much says it himself. He believes she heard the name Cornelia somewhere and suspects she's using it to get his help. I'm sorry, does he not see those bright green eyes? She's a carbon copy of her mother. But he doesn't blame her. Regardless of the truth, he can tell she's desperate and that her mother truly is sick. So whoever she is, he wants to help. Seriously, is this man a saint or something? Now I feel even worse about how he died in her past life. As the fire crackles, he admits that he has many regrets about how she left the Criton family. He knows now that he made a lot of mistakes and wishes he had never let her go in the first place. You see, originally Cornelia was engaged to the current emperor, James Bazat Castro. But somewhere along the way, she fell in love with her bodyguard, Guile Houston. She wanted to marry him instead, but when her father refused to accept an ordinary man as her husband, they eloped. Guile passed away in a battle against demons, and in the end, Cornelia was left to raise Mirabel by herself. When they finally arrive at the house, Mirabel finds her mother's condition has worsened. She's so relieved to see her daughter once again that she collapses, trembling as she holds her child. Across the room, her father is also starting to shake. There's no doubt about it. This woman truly is his long-lost daughter. He also gets on his knees and pulls her into a tight hug while the two of them start to cry. After the emotional reunion has ended, The Grand Duke asks about Guile. He's devastated to think of her struggling to raise Mirabel alone for the past 4 years, not to mention with her terrible disease. He can't understand why she didn't come back to the mansion as soon as she found out, so Mirabel explains a misunderstanding with the letters. Obviously, she doesn't mention that his evil brother Daniel has been hiding all of them because, well, that would make her sound crazy. There's a lot to discuss, so the Grand Duke asks her to come back to the mansion where they can catch up and summon a doctor to look at her. While the Grand Duke is sorting things out with his servants, mother and daughter have a quiet moment alone. Cornelia thanks her daughter for being so brave and going to find her grandfather, but she also asks her never again to do something so dangerous. Which seems kind of fair. How panicked would you be if your kid just suddenly disappeared for 3 days? Once they have everything packed, they head toward the carriage, where Cornelia finds a sneaky excuse to get her father and daughter holding hands. They finally get rolling, and the Grand Duke thanks Mirabel for reuniting their family. She thanks him also for being so trusting. Not many people would undertake a 3-day journey on the slim chance that their daughter might be at the end of it. On the road back to the capital, the Grand Duke and Cornelia share stories and fill each other in on all that's happened in the last few years. When they arrive at the estate, the first person to greet them is Cornelia's brother, Brian, the current Duke of House Criton. He treats Mirabel like any other niece and tells her to call him uncle from now on. Isn't that sweet? I'm just waiting for the moment that horrible Daniel guy shows his face. Next up is Brian's son, Elliot Criton. He's just as friendly as the rest of them and shakes her hand like a proper little gentleman. Once introductions are done, they head inside to rest up. For the time being, Mirabel will share a room with her mother while the staff prepare a separate one for her. So far, everything seems to be sunshine and daisies, which is how you know bad news is just around the corner. After being examined by a high priest, Cornelia is prescribed repeat treatment once a week for the next 3 months. The priest serves the goddess Duana, the mother of all gods. Those who serve her are blessed with healing abilities, which means they basically serve as doctors for those who can afford them. The high priest is confident that Cornelia can make a full recovery in that time, but he also wants to examine Mirabel. Apparently, the disease is genetic, so there's a chance it could be passed on. A little nervous, Mirabel offers him her hand. She ends up being all clear for the disease, but the high priest discovers something entirely different. Mirabel seems to have a talent for harnessing divine power, something she never discovered in her previous life. Could this be something she acquired when she was reborn? I don't think divine power and mercenary skills would have made a very good match in her past. The high priest invites her to visit the temple sometime, offering to teach her how to use her abilities. The idea is bittersweet for Mirabel, who loves the idea of being able to heal people like her mother. If only she had this power last time. She agrees to make a visit, and the next morning, the family sit down to have breakfast together. Everything is going well, except for the fact that Mirabel is struggling to concentrate. I mean, can you blame her? Why is everyone in her family so damn handsome? Uncle Brian is being especially attentive, which comes as quite the contrast to his reputation in her past life. He was known for being cold and cruel, something that Mirabel saw for herself one time on a demon expedition. Back then, he was the Iron Duke, who moved from one slaughter to another without batting an eye. Now he's like a chatty grandma who won't shut up about how proud he is of her. He then starts babbling about how he wishes they could grow closer so that she won't be so uncomfortable around him. Are we sure this is the same Uncle Brian? The Grand Duke then asks if there's anything she wants. He's never had the chance to spoil his granddaughter before, so now he's keen to make up for it. Suddenly, Geoffrey comes to mind. Although he's on the right track to success as a mercenary, it would be nice if she could make things a little easier for him until then. So she asks her grandfather to lift the bounty on Geoffrey, and he promises to do his best. In other news, the Emperor has somehow already heard about Cornelia's return and asked her to pay him a visit. Uh-oh, that could be awkward. But Cornelia is surprisingly brave and decides to visit him that same day. Since she caused him a lot of trouble for abandoning their marriage, she wants to make things right as soon as possible. That could never be me. I would have just played up the disease if I was her. After Mirabel has eaten her fill on egg tarts, the mansion maids get to work on fixing her a whole new wardrobe. Cornelia then asks her daughter to accompany her to the palace, since she's a little scared to face the Emperor alone. I'm not surprised. They show up looking like a perfect pair of dolls and are greeted first by Tennervin, the Grand Master of the Royal Guards. He escorts them inside where the Emperor is waiting, rather impatiently. The first thing he says is that they're late. No, "Oh, I'm glad you're alive," or "I'm sorry to hear about that whole terminal illness thing." Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna like this guy. He doesn't seem to have recovered from the day she ran away. Even now, it's obvious that he loved her deeply. Cornelia manages to stand her ground, apologizing for the hurt she caused, but not for her decision. He notices Mirabel and asks her to leave them alone for a while. You know, so they can get into the nitty-gritty stuff that only exes can talk about. On her way out, Mirabel bumps into Prince Adrian Castro, the spitting image of his father. Although he's cute, he is pretty stuck up, even for a prince. He's surprised to find out that House Criton has another child and becomes immediately curious about who is currently talking to his father. Mirabel realizes he knows more than he's letting on. He ran all the way here as soon as he saw his mother, the Empress, crying about this blast from the past. He wants to teach whoever they are a lesson, but seems very surprised when Mirabel announces that her mother meant no harm. The next moment, the Empress herself shows up. When she notices Mirabel, she invites her to have snacks and tea while the grown-ups finish their conversation, which is remarkably kind of her. If I was her, I wouldn't be able to stand the sight of someone who looks so much like my husband's ex-fiancé. Why is everyone in this empire so damned nice? While having tea out in the gardens, Cornelia appears, and things get real awkward real quick. The Empress blames her for causing 8 years of struggle in her marriage, while the Emperor waited for his true love to return. Oof, is she really going to admit all of that in front of her son? More than anything, the Empress is upset that Cornelia disappeared without a word. They used to be friends, and for a long time she didn't know if she was alive or dead. Despite that anger and pain, the ladies are soon hugging it out. They must have been really, really good friends if they can get past all of that. Soon after, the mothers and their kids are sitting down for tea and cake like nothing ever happened. The older ladies are happy for the chance to catch up, though the Empress still has a lot of questions, mainly about why she never reached out. But I mean, you can understand her position. How do you write to a best friend who's now married to your ex-fiancé? Where would you even start? Mirabel listens closely to her mother and Empress Marianne's conversation. The truth is, Marianne had loved the Emperor for many years. She had only just decided to give up on him when Cornelia ran away with her bodyguard. After that, it seemed like all her dreams had come true. Marianne got to fill the empty spot and marry the man she loved. Only, it wasn't quite that simple. Emperor Castro continued to wait for Cornelia's return. It took 2 whole years of being engaged for him to finally give in and marry the Empress, so you can imagine how difficult that time was for her. Fortunately, when Prince Adrian was born, Marianne found something new to live for, and her life changed for the better. Speaking of the prince, Adrian is making an effort to act more like a gentleman to Mirabel, despite their rocky start. After spending a wonderful afternoon together, Mirabel and her mother make their exit, promising to return soon. Prince Adrian awkwardly waves her off as they get into the carriage. Okay, I know he's kind of arrogant, but I think I'm starting to like this kid. On the way home, Mirabel is plotting the next stage of her rebirth plan, collecting evidence on Daniel. She asks her mother if there's anyone in the Criton family she hasn't met yet. Cornelia tells her about Daniel, but judging by her expression, it seems she doesn't yet suspect him of anything. Cornelia then asks her a favor. From now on, can she call the Grand Duke Grandpa? Oh, you mean the man she spent all of her past life hating and still finds it awkward to be in the same room with? Sure, no biggie. But he is actually her grandpa, and if it would mean a lot to her mother, then Mirabel is willing to give it a go. The Grand Duke is there to greet the girls when they return, asking plenty of questions about the Emperor and how it all went down at the palace. Cornelia assures him there's no bad blood, which comes as a relief to her father. As instructed, Mirabel asks her mother to head upstairs first so that she can talk to her grandpa for a moment. Nice one. Looks like the Grand Duke really appreciates that. After her mother has gone, the two sit down for tea in the very same reception room where she lost her life last time. Despite the eerie setting, Mirabel is focused on her mission. She can't just outright say she suspects Daniel, a grand uncle that she's never met, of hiding her mother's letters. So instead, she plants the seed of doubt in his mind, asking how it's possible for all those letters to have disappeared. She sent at least 2 a week, some via the Merchants Guild and even through mercenaries. She admits that she's worried. Maybe someone has ill intentions towards Cornelia and her daughter and intercept them on purpose? She's playing the innocent little girl act, but inside, Mirabel's mind is raging. Daniel is the real reason her mother passed away, the reason she had to bury her with her own 2 hands and fend for herself growing up. The Grand Duke is also suspicious about the disappearing letters, but reassures her that no one in the mansion would do such a thing. Mirabel doesn't push it, but she does ask him to look into it as a favor. Then she heads back to her bedroom, wondering if there's a chance her Uncle Brian might have been in on Daniel's schemes. But he has nothing to gain from siding with him, so it doesn't seem likely. At the perfect moment, Mirabel is passing the balcony over the main hall when the very villain she's been expecting finally arrives. Daniel Criton, looking just as smug as ever, has appeared at last. Daniel spots her at once and asks the butler who she is. Apparently, he didn't know that Cornelia even had a daughter, though that's obviously a lie, considering he intercepted all of her letters. Hesitantly, Mirabel walks downstairs to greet him. Duke Daniel is all kind smiles and warmth, while Mirabel just glares at him, not even bothering to hide her disgust. Come on, girl, at this rate she's going to give herself away. She's taken aback by just how well he lies. If she hadn't been literally murdered because of him in her past life, she probably would have fallen for this kind old uncle act. That must be why no one else in their family suspects him either. Well, two can play that game. Acting like a nervous child, Mirabel introduces herself, but when Daniel reaches for her, she instinctively flinches and takes a step back. So much for playing it cool. Daniel just brushes it off and asks her to guide him to the Grand Duke's current whereabouts. The butler is encouraging her to get to know him, so even though she really doesn't want to, Mirabel agrees and swiftly leads him up the stairs. While she takes him through the corridors, Daniel remarks on how uncomfortable she seems. He assumes that because she lived her entire life as a peasant, the adjustment to noble life must be hard. He even says she acts like one. The nerve of this guy! He does at least call her pretty, though honestly, it's still a red flag to me. What is she, 9? There's no need to be discussing suitors at this age. Mirabel has a hard time keeping quiet, but she's determined to enact every step of her revenge carefully. There's plenty of time to take him down. If she has to bear this man a little longer, then she can do exactly that. But he's not exactly making it easy, already giving detailed suggestions as to which noble family she should marry into for the sake of their reputation. Ugh, he really is the worst. Even the butler looks uncomfortable. Fortunately, someone else shuts him up before she has the chance to lose her temper. Elliot doesn't hesitate to stand up to his great uncle, shutting down his latest suggestion that Mirabel should marry a man 3 times her age. He even goes so far as to say Daniel needs medicine for his memory loss if he can't remember how old Duke George is. Boom! Mic drop moment. He points out that Maribel is still new to the manor. If anyone needs a guide, it's her. He then tells his cousin that her room is ready and swiftly separates her from Daniel. Clearly, the Grand Duke's younger brother isn't loved by everyone. Mirabel's mood picks up immediately upon entering her new bedroom. She's also very grateful that Elliot stood up for her. He warns her to keep her distance from Daniel in the future, especially in situations where they could end up alone together. Well, that's creepy as heck. What happened to make Elliot so wary of him? She decides to ask him straight out, taking advantage of her privileges as a clueless child. Actually, the truth is that Elliot has experienced the same thing she just did. Their great uncle seems to obsess over marriage and what kind of match would most benefit House Criton. It's like he sees them more as products than relatives. Mirabel is a little surprised to see how offended Elliot got. Of course, an adult wouldn't stand for that kind of talk, but most kids probably wouldn't understand enough to be upset. Suddenly, she considers an alternate reason for his reaction: puppy love. Elliot suddenly turns bright red, reluctantly admitting that he does indeed have a crush on someone. Isn't he just too cute? Reluctantly, he reveals that her name is Zaniel Suffren. Then he suddenly stands up and says he's leaving. The door slams behind him, but Mirabel is still smiling long after he's left. In her past life, she once heard a rumor that Lord Criton and Lady Suffren got married, so it looks like Elliot's first love will come true someday. Now, back to the task at hand. It couldn't have been Daniel himself who intercepted the letters, which means there was someone working for him. Someone with enough power to give orders without the permission of the Grand Duke. Immediately, one person comes to mind: Butler Barden, the man who was waiting so keenly on Daniel this afternoon. Even the way they talked to each other made them seem close. Of course, that's not enough evidence to suspect him. Maybe this is a conspiracy of multiple people? From here, it seems like Mirabel will have to investigate the house staff more thoroughly if she wants any further information. If she thinks hard about it, she can kind of understand why Daniel did what he did. Cornelia breaking off her engagement with the Emperor caused a huge rift between House Criton and the imperial family. But that's still no excuse to cut her off from her grandfather and eventually murder her daughter. Obviously, he never considered the idea that Cornelia's return could fix that rift. From how things went down today, it certainly seems possible. A maid knocks at the door, pulling Mirabel from her thoughts. Her name is Kalina, and by her side is Anita, a young girl who will be her very own personal maid from now on. They help her get changed, and soon all three of them are headed to the dining hall for dinner. On the way, they meet Uncle Brian, who praises her for accompanying her mother to the palace today. I'm pretty sure he's actually just prying her for information, but Mirabel is a loyal daughter. Her lips are sealed. As usual, he seems nervous to ask his niece if he can keep her company, apparently worried about being rejected by a 9-year-old. Honestly, are we sure this is the same guy they called the Iron Duke? This weepy man? He literally just started crying over her cuteness. It's still a little difficult for Mirabel to believe that this is all real. After years of struggling with no one but her mother by her side, having a reliable family who truly care for her is quite a shock to the system. As they walk, she tells her uncle about her meeting with the Empress and Prince Adrian. She asks if he knew about Marianne's relationship with her mother, and he confirms that she was one of the most devastated when Cornelia ran away. Brian has already guessed that Adrian might have been rude to her, but Mirabel keeps her lips sealed about that too. She's a natural at being a noble. He encourages her to speak up if the prince ever gives her trouble in future. Her Uncle Brian is actually his swordsmanship instructor, so it would be only too easy to teach him a lesson. I like the sound of that. On that subject, Mirabel suddenly asks if he could teach her swordplay too. Obviously, she has plenty of experience from her past life, but she never received formal training. And since she died in a sword fight, it's only natural that she wants to protect herself this time around. Brian warns her that he wouldn't take it easy on her just because they're related, but Mirabel is determined to learn, no matter how hard it might be. So Brian accepts her as his pupil. Their first lesson will be tomorrow at sunrise. Oof, he wasn't kidding about not taking it easy. The two of them finally arrive at the dining hall, where Mirabel's doting grandfather insists she sit beside him. Her grand uncle gets to watch firsthand how the whole family revolves around her. The Grand Duke is just as protective as Brian, but everyone is clearly very affectionate towards her. You see that, Daniel? You better watch out. On the contrary, instead he pokes fun at his brother for not getting all teary-eyed because of his granddaughter. The Grand Duke thinks they haven't met, so he tries to introduce them before Daniel interrupts. Elliot steps in to explain, taking the chance to expose Daniel's behavior instead of letting him sugarcoat what really happened. You go, Elliot! The Grand Duke doesn't take it too seriously, but he does give his brother a few words of caution. Maybe that will put him back in his place. Barely half an hour later, the Duke is already telling the story of how Mirabel first arrived at the mansion, bragging about how clever his granddaughter is. She feels a little awkward having the attention of the whole table, but her mother's gentle touch provides some comfort. Daniel is still playing the part of the doting uncle, even suggesting she could fit to lead the dukedom someday. Yeah, right. As if that wasn't enough, he goes one step further and proposes they host a ball to celebrate Cornelia's return. I don't know about you guys, but I smell a scheme. Cornelia seems hesitant to accept, mostly because she's worried about her daughter. It's important to remember that in noble society, a ball is never just a ball. It will be a chance to celebrate and reconnect with old friends, but also a chance for people to gossip behind their backs. That's probably the main reason Daniel suggested it in the first place. For that reason, Mirabel is determined to prove that she can't be so easily frightened. With her daughter on board, Cornelia hesitantly accepts the idea, and so the Grand Duke agrees to begin the preparations right away. The next morning, Mirabel is getting ready for her first ever swordsmanship lesson with Uncle Brian. Her young maid Anita seems upset that she couldn't help her get dressed. She's kind of adorable, seeing how dedicated she is to her new job already. She leads Mirabel to the training hall, where the soldiers are already hard at work doing their exercises for the day. Brian and Elliot are there too. They decide to start with a warm-up demonstration and tell Mirabel to follow each step carefully. After that comes a test of stamina, which is basically just a one-lap race around the training room. Mirabel puts her all into every stage and quickly realizes that she's nowhere near as fit as she was in her mercenary days. Yeah, no duh. She's not a trained fighter anymore. She's a 9-year-old. Despite her exhaustion, Uncle Brian is very proud of her efforts already. But he wasn't kidding about not cutting her any slack. She's barely caught her breath before they're doing sit-ups. If I was her, I would have gone back to bed by now. Anita struggles watching her mistress collapse over and over again from exhaustion. It kind of seems like it's hard on her Uncle Brian too, though he sticks to his promise and sees the session through to the end. Before she's even allowed to touch a sword, he's determined to raise her stamina by doing these exercises every morning. Although it's tiring, Mirabel is determined to prove herself, so she assures him she's up to the task, and thanks him for taking the time to train her. That day at lunch, the Grand Duke is delighted to hear how hard his granddaughter worked, and looks forward to her future progress. Of course, Daniel can't help but stick his nose where it doesn't belong, asking if there's really any need for a daughter of Criton to learn how to fight. This time, Mirabel doesn't wait for anyone to step in and defend her. She answers herself that there are plenty of successful female knights in the Empire. That would probably have done the job, but she can't help herself. Mirabel then goes on to suggest that he's only belittling her efforts because he's never achieved anything in his own life. Whoa, I'm surprised she got away with that one. In his own subtle way, Daniel strikes back by claiming that Mirabel is in dire need of some etiquette lessons before she's exposed to wider society. Unfortunately, that is an unavoidable aspect of noble life, so they agree to let Cornelia start looking for suitable tutors. She herself wants to brush up on the basics, so she'll be sitting in on some lessons to refamiliarize herself. After lunch, Mirabel finally makes the trip to the temple like she promised the high priest. On the way, she thinks over her conversation with her mother, who confessed that she was worried about her daughter learning the same craft as her father. It only makes sense that she be concerned, especially since he was killed in battle. Mirabel assures her nothing like that will happen again. Their fighting days are over. Or so we hope. On the carriage ride, she spots a tuft of silver hair, certain for a moment that it's Geoffrey. The carriage driver slams on the brakes, but he's already gone, so Mirabel decides to ask someone at the mansion to find out what he's up to these days. Curious, Anita asks about him, wondering if there was something between the two kids. Mirabel says it's nothing dramatic. Their bond is only worth a few potatoes. Finally, she arrives at the temple, keen to discover the full extent of her divine abilities. The same high priest greets Mirabel and her little entourage, grateful that she made the effort to visit. He guides them inside the temple to a grand set of doors which only she can enter. He doesn't explain what will happen, only that all the other priests have gone through this experience. It's sort of like a rite of passage. Well, that sounds incredibly suspicious. You can understand why Mirabel is nervous. But she doesn't question the priest and pushes open the doors to find a long hallway with a large blue gem at the center. Her nerves get the better of her, and Mirabel starts wondering if this is a trap. She's just turning around when an elderly man calls her back. He introduces himself as Pleon, a name she recognizes as the saint of the Temple of Duana. Unfortunately, by pointing this out, she also exposes herself. Saint Pleon didn't actually appear until she was 20 in her past life. No one in this timeline should know of him yet. But Pleon doesn't seem to be surprised. In fact, he seems to know exactly who she is. Apparently, they've been looking for her for some time. They know that she came from the future, but Mirabel admits herself that she doesn't have very useful information. She lived a pretty ordinary life last time, so unless he wants tips on how to camp out in the woods or fall into the trap of an evil great-uncle, she doesn't have much to offer. But Pleon says she's more special than that. She was chosen by an entity. That's why she's been sent back here. He pulls out a pendant chain with a tiny little snake, claiming that thing somehow sent her to the past. Ugh, what is it with these priest types? Why can't they just be straightforward? Before she can ask him anything else, Pleon vanishes into a pile of ash. She doesn't see him again, and in the days that follow, there isn't much time to think about their interaction. Her new schedule is full of lessons in stamina training and etiquette. Her tutor, Viscountess Maynard, taught Cornelia too when she was younger. She's pretty intense, but they have to rush things a bit since the ball is now only one day away. When she finally gets a moment to herself, Mirabel pulls out the snake pendant, surprised to find that its eyes are closed now. Right before her eyes, they open again, suddenly staring right back at her. At first, Mirabel can hardly believe what she's seeing, but things get even weirder when she suddenly hears a voice in her head. It sounds like a little girl, but there's no doubting it came from the pendant. What the heck is a talking snake doing locked up in a necklace? The snake introduces itself as Goddess Duana's very own guardian dragon, who goes by the name Vivre. She can even come out of the pendant to speak to her. The name rings a bell. Vivre is known to the common people as a serpent servant of the goddess. But that creature was meant to be white, with a long, scaly body, translucent wings, and ruby red eyes. This friendly little blob looks nothing like the creature of legend. She's just plain cute. Mirabel falls for her at once, unable to take the serpent seriously. Vivre assures her there's a very good reason for appearing in this form. It turns out she's been trapped inside this pendant ever since her battle against the infamous Black Dragon. She lost a lot of strength, so now she can only appear in this form. Now it makes sense as to why St. Pleon kept referring to this pendant as a living being. It all sounds a bit crazy if you ask me, but after dying and being reborn as her 9-year-old self, pretty much anything is possible for Mirabel. She assures Vivre that she has no suspicions about her identity, and asks why Pleon entrusted her of all people with such an important creature. Vivre claims she can answer all her most desperate questions, including the most important one of all. Why was she brought back to life? The only reason it was physically possible, Vivre claims, is because she retained a trace of the Black Dragon Calypso. You see, in the future, sometime after Mirabel died, Calypso was revived. But even before his return, he was able to influence humans, including Daniel. However, as Mirabel points out, those two things don't add up. Just because she was killed by someone under the influence of the Black Dragon, that doesn't automatically explain how she went back in time. Wouldn't that mean everyone Daniel killed that day was reborn, including the Grand Duke? Vivre explains that the one who brought her back wasn't Calypso. It was her. With Pleon's help, of course. She chose him to prevent the resurrection of the Black Dragon, giving him some of her powers to root out those under his influence. But the two of them never managed to defeat Daniel, and ultimately they failed to prevent the return of Calypso. It was Pleon who found Mirabel first, so he sealed Vivre into the pendant while she turned back time to search for her. He waited for years and years at the Temple of Duana, and when she finally arrived, his job was complete. That's why he just turned to ash in front of her. He literally died on the spot. At this point, I just want to pause and say if anyone else's head is spinning, don't worry, I'm with you. But what is clear so far is that Mirabel wasn't brought back to life for revenge, but to stop the Black Dragon. Vivre seems to have a lot of faith in her, but our 9-year-old heroine is a little skeptical. After all, even in her past life, she only lived to 26. Couldn't they have picked someone with a little more experience? Fortunately, Vivre doesn't want her to defeat Calypso in battle, just entrap and seal him in an eternal slumber. Sure, no biggie, sounds like a piece of cake. Currently, the Black Dragon is bound by powerful magical constraints, so she just needs to make sure those restraints never get severed, or in other words, stop the resurrection from happening in the first place. Still, it's hardly a simple task, and if there's one thing Mirabel learned back in her days as a mercenary, it was to never work for free. So in exchange for taking on this insane mission, she wants to be compensated. Vivre assures her that if she is successful, the Temple of Duana will treat her like a saint and give her anything she asks for. But Mirabel isn't interested in a physical reward. Based on what Vivre has said so far, it seems like Daniel is the one trying to free Calypso from its restraints. All she wants is proof, evidence of his wrongdoings, so that she can use them and banish Daniel from her family before he can try to take over. If she can prove his ties to the Black Dragon, then convincing her relatives that he's up to no good will be much easier. Unfortunately, Vivre doesn't have any information. All she knows is that there's a group of villains who support the Black Dragon, and Daniel Criton is their leader. She also doesn't have any further information on how to stop him either. She's kinda useless for a Divine Guardian, isn't she? What she can do is give Mirabel some divine power, which will help her stand a chance against the Black Dragon's supporters. Divine powers would certainly help in her mission to get revenge. Plus, we can't ignore the fact that Vivre and Pleon literally saved her life. She kind of owes them. Just to make sure she understands, Mirabel asks if they want her to eliminate Daniel before he can resurrect the Black Dragon. In that case, their goals align. It's like hitting two birds with one stone. I mean, one of those birds is really a dragon, but same difference, right? Mirabel accepts, and Vivre is so grateful that she starts to cry. Can serpents even shed tears? I'm getting distracted. Now that the big stuff is out of the way, they can get down to the details. Vivre promises to give her two different kinds of divine power. One, she already knows, the healing power available only to priests blessed by goddess Duana. The other is a little more exciting. Vivre summons a ball of golden light above them. It slowly floats down to Mirabel and morphs into the shape of an elegant sword. And this is no ordinary sword. Crafted from one of Vivre's own bones, this sword is known as Lespid, and has been passed on from generation to generation of those who have joined the battle against Calypso. It's especially powerful against the dark powers that the dragon uses to control his servants, and only appears when she wants it. To test this theory, she squeezes her eyes tight shut and thinks about no longer wanting the sword. Just like that, it vanishes. Which is a good thing too. Anyone under the Black Dragon's influence will recognize it at once, so it's important to keep the sword hidden unless the situation calls for it. Mirabel summons it again, giving the sword a few test swipes to try it out. It's been quite some time since she last held one, but you know our girl still has a knack for it. Hopefully that will give her the motivation she needs to get through Uncle Brian's brutal training. With a new mission to work towards, Mirabel wakes up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. Which is fortunate, since the ball is right around the corner. Literally. Anita and Kalina do their best to make her glow in a beautiful ball gown, and then Elliot is there to escort her to the main event. This is quite the stage for her debut appearance in society, demonstrating the power and influence of the House of Criton. It's a pretty big deal, but rather than being intimidated, all Mirabel can think about is Daniel and what his next move is going to be. Meanwhile, Elliot thinks she's distracted because of nerves and assures her that she will do just fine on her debut. Plus, they're a pretty powerful family. Even if she does mess up, no one would dare mention it. Like a proper young gentleman, Elliot takes her hand and they head inside together. They are announced in front of just about every member of noble society, and then the Grand Duke takes her and Cornelia aside for a speech. Everyone knows Cornelia already, so they seem especially interested in the little girl by her side. It's clear to see that the Duke is very fond of her, so the reaction from the crowd is very positive. The Duke gives the guests permission to freely enjoy themselves, allowing Mirabel too to relax. Soon after, she spots the prince and his mother, the Empress, entering from above. She wasn't expecting both of them to show up, but it's certainly a boost for the Criton family's reputation. Prince Adrian seems to be looking for her and points her out to his mother. They walk over to greet the Critons, though the Empress is particularly sweet towards Mirabel. While the ladies chat like old friends, Adrian kind of just stares at her until he builds up the courage to say she looks nice. Clearly, he didn't mean to say it out loud, judging by the way he immediately turns bright red. Aww, he's such a cutie. He apologizes for his behavior when they first met. It's not the most convincing apology in the world, but Mirabel really doesn't mind. The gesture itself is enough for her to forgive him with a kind smile. Now that they've made up, the prince asks her formally to be his friend, in the most adorably awkward way possible. I know he's the prince, but did anyone teach him social skills? He can't seem to stop blushing. Cornelia and Marianne are finding the whole thing very amusing, but Mirabel has taken the request very seriously and is now weighing up whether Prince Adrian is truly the kind of person she wants to be friends with. So far, he's just been acting like a sweet little brother, so she accepts, shaking his hand as Adrian boldly declares that they are now officially friends. What is this, some kind of political agreement? Immediately, Adrian brightens up and asks her for one more favor. Would she like to dance? Mirabel, of course, thinks this is all just fun with friends, but I think all of us can read the expression on Prince Adrian's face. This is young love. No one can convince me otherwise. Mirabel agrees, but asks him to do it the right way and make a formal request, the way gentlemen do at balls like these. Adrian takes it very seriously, getting down on one knee and offering her his hand. Is this the way people ask for dances here? It looks more like he's about to propose. She takes his hand, allowing him to lead her confidently onto the dance floor. Since he's younger, he's still quite a bit shorter than she is, but that doesn't seem to bother Adrian as he spins her around the room. He spends the whole time looking totally terrified, but at least he's not a bad dancer. Or maybe I spoke too soon. The next second, he slipped and is heading for the ground when Mirabel catches him at just the right moment, bridal style. Oh, how the tables have turned. Everyone in the ball is now obsessed with Mirabel, but the poor prince is humiliated. She reassures him that it's really no big deal. They're still just kids. He doesn't have to act like a perfect royal yet. Even so, both of them are acting like perfect little nobles when they part ways. The guests are so impressed with their manners that they actually applaud them for making such a lovely pair. Of course, people are already talking about their future relationship and how a wedding between the two could change the fate of the Criton and Imperial families for the better. Would people calm down already? They're only children. Adrian doesn't seem bothered one bit by the gossiping, but for Mirabel, who is actually 26, it's obviously pretty uncomfortable. Luckily, Elliot arrives to break up the discomfort, offering a formal greeting to Adrian as well. He compliments their dancing and then introduces the girl beside him, who is none other than Zaniel Suffren, his secret one true love. And boy, is she pretty! Elliot certainly has good taste! She introduces herself to the prince while Mirabel watches her cousin closely. Zaniel is already gushing with how happy she is to meet her, since Elliot has been singing her praises for quite some time. Mirabel is already delighted since she knows they end up married in the future. But that kind of makes her want to tease them, so she asks if they're going to follow the prince's lead and dance together. Obviously, when she puts it that way, they can't really refuse, but both kids are turning bright red from embarrassment. Mirabel then suggests that maybe Elliot can't dance, which leaves him no choice. Feeling the need to prove himself, he asks Zaniel to accompany him to the dance floor, with the same awkward fumbling that Adrian had. The couple walk away, leaving the prince another chance to make his move. Since it's her first grand ball, he offers to accompany Mirabel for the rest of the evening. You know, to show her the ropes. And he does his job very dutifully, teaching her about wine being off limits and how children usually debut in high society. Even though she already knows all of this, Mirabel listens politely. Eventually, the prince falls asleep and is carried to bed, giving her a chance to quietly step outside. The ball has gone on for much longer than she expected, and frankly, Mirabel is a little drained. She decides to take a short walk around the perimeter and spots something rustling in the bushes. Any normal girl would run back to safety, but this is Mirabel. Instead, she grabs a stick and jumps into the wilderness, ready to attack whatever comes out at her. The last thing she's expecting is for Jeffrey to emerge, scrambling through the undergrowth with a tiny bouquet in hand. He gets the fright of his life when he looks up to find Mirabel looming over him with her giant stick. She helps Jeffrey to his feet, asking how the heck he ended up at the grand ball. Of course, he came to see her and seems delighted that he stumbled upon her all the way out here. Mirabel isn't quite so pleased. If he had been found by a guard, he'd be in serious trouble. Jeffrey, as usual, isn't bothered about the risks. He just wanted to see her and hand her this adorable tiny bouquet. It doesn't quite pay off his potato debt, but it's certainly a start. Mirabel likes it so much that she pins it to her dress for safekeeping. Poor Adrian is probably tucked up in bed right now. He has no idea Mr. Steal Your Girl himself has arrived. Mirabel gives Jeffrey an affectionate pat and tells him to be more cautious next time, making him blush. When she pulls out the leaf in his hair, the poor boy nearly faints. He has a lot more scars than when they last met and wants to try healing them with her new divine powers, but initially, Jeffrey is far too embarrassed to let her try. That's what our Mirabel does. She's an expert at making boys nervous. Then he summons his courage and grabs her, inviting her to look more closely at the wounds. Now she's the one who's flustered, mainly because she doesn't want them to get caught, but still, now that she actually has him prepped, Mirabel realizes she has no idea how to use her divine powers. Fortunately, Vivre is there to teach her, whispering from the locket to focus her energy at the end of her fingertips. Mirabel is so talented it takes no time at all, and soon Jeffrey's cheek is perfectly healed. He's pretty impressed, but she asks him to keep this a secret for now. Things could get messy if the adults find out about her powers at this stage. Mirabel wants a chance to properly catch up, so she leads him to an isolated spot near a pond. She wants to know why he took such a big risk to come visit, but Jeffrey just wanted to say thank you. The Grand Duke Criton lifted his bounty and even paid off his debt to the man who killed his parents. He couldn't understand why, and even visited the house for an explanation. Eventually, he ran into the Grand Duke himself, who explained that he was just doing what his granddaughter wished. Jeffrey was curious, so he tailed the Critons and eventually saw Mirabel in a carriage headed back from the temple. So it was Jeffrey she saw that day. While holding hands like a real couple, Jeffrey thanks her from the bottom of his heart for clearing his name. He's so grateful that he actually starts to cry. Mirabel encourages him to let it all out. She even hands him a handkerchief, which Jeffrey decides to keep. He catches her staring at him because, well, duh, our girl is smitten, but Mirabel just says it's because she likes his hair. For a moment, Jeffrey is tongue-tied, but then he turns back and calls her pretty. I'm obsessed with these two. Mirabel, as always, brushes it off by thinking he's still trying to express his gratitude. If she's this bad at sensing when people have feelings for her, well, this is going to be a hella long series. Out of nowhere, she asks Jeffrey if he wants to stay with her from now on at the Criton mansion. She knows what lies ahead for Jeffrey if he continues down the path set out for him. The road to becoming the king of mercenaries will no doubt be full of hardship and pain. Jeffrey thanks her for the offer but politely declines. She's already helped him a lot, so now he's determined to make his own way. But he does ask permission to come and visit from time to time, which Maribel obviously grants, on the condition that he stops sneaking in through the bushes. They hear Cornelia calling, so Jeffrey heads out. He pauses, about to say something important, before the courage fails him and he runs away. Oh, these boys, why are they all such babies? I guess some of them are actual babies, but still. After the ball, the Criton household returned to normal with a few small changes. After 2 dreary weeks of stamina training, Uncle Brian finally allows her to start training with a wooden sword. Things only got harder from there, but being taught by a real master makes it all worth it. Brian is already singing her praises and tells Cornelia that her daughter has a true gift. Daniel, as always, is there to put down her achievements and make it seem like she might get hurt. Shut up, Daniel! No one asked for your opinion! He also asks Cornelia if she saw any handsome men at the grand ball. He's trying to get her remarried because, apparently, his agenda is just to marry everyone in his family off so that he can take the throne. Ugh, I can't stand this guy! Mirabel won't let him get away with it. She exposes him in front of the whole family for trying to set her up with some older men, and even said it was for the sake of the family's prospects. Daniel tries to play it off and claim it was a misunderstanding, but Elliot backs her up. The Grand Duke heavily cautions him, but he still assumes Daniel has no bad intentions, and tells the kids it was probably a misunderstanding. After lunch, Mirabel finds Elliot out in the gardens, hoping to approach her potential ally to team up against their great uncle. And that's it for today, guys. What did you think? As always, don't forget to like the video and comment for the next part so we know you want more. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for updates. See you in the next one!